Hello, and welcome to another episode of Video Homework Help with your professor and host, Dr. Rebecca Garcia. In this episode, we will discuss finding the equilibrium for a supply and demand scenario. This particular scenario assumes that supply and demand are linear, and here we go. At the start of the problem, it lists that you have a price of $2.50 for there's a demand of 3717 items and supply of 2000 items. So one price giving two different types of quantities. In the second sentence, a second price gives rise to two different types of quantities as well. What that means is that you are going to have a demand equation and a supply equation. And for both, we see that it's giving us 2 points. The first point for demand is 3717 and 250. I like to write it in terms of quantity and price, like so. The second point for demand comes from the second statement, and that is 1827 and 460. Supply, on the other hand, has as a point on its line 2000, 250. And then for the second point, it would be 3680 and 460. Right, so given these 2 points, and let me go ahead and shrink this down. It's taking up an awful lot of space. So for each of these two quantities, demand and supply, we can come up with a linear equation that goes through those points. So I will work in magenta for the demand and then work in orange for supply. To come up with the equation for demand, well, we need a slope. And in this case, that comes from rise over run. And as long as you're consistent, it doesn't matter which way you go. But here we go with 460 minus 250 over 1827 minus 3717. And while I say make sure you're consistent, notice here that I start with the p's on the second, and so I must start with the q's on the second point as well. So my slope, when I work it out, ends up being negative, let's see, what is it when I end up working it out? I like to use Desmos. It's quite a nice tool for calculating things and lets you see if you're typing everything correctly. So we get 210 over well, it works out to be negative 1/9. And so this is the slope of the demand. Let me shrink this down. And we're going to use that to figure out the line. So that is the slope. Now we want to do the line for the supply, the slope for supply. So for the slope for supply, we do similarly 460 minus 250. This time 3680 minus 2000, and we work that out, and we get 1/8. Okie dokie. Let's just shrink that bit down. Right, so we have slope and we have points, so we can put together the line for each of these. So to get the line, I like to use, since we're using Q's and P's, let's go ahead and use Q's and P's. P equals MQ plus B, quite like the Y equals MX plus B. But in this case, we know that we got the M as negative 1/9, so we can go ahead and put negative 1/9 for M times Q plus B. How do we solve for B? Well, we take any one of these 2 points, let's say the first point, and we take the Q value and put it in there for Q, and take the P value and put it in there for P, and then simplify, and you'll have your answer for what B is. So if I do 250 equals negative 1/9 times 3717 plus B, scooch that over, then negative 1/9 times 3717 is, oh dear, I ran out of music. That means it was too long. Oh no, I didn't run out of music. So B equals 250 plus 413, which is 663. And so therefore, our demand equation is negative 1/9 Q plus 663. That's very important. We shall take this. That's what I'll keep, and I'll take everything else, all this other work, and just shrink it and put it to the side, so you know that it's there. Now we want to do the exact same thing for supply. So for supply, we have, I'll work that out in orange, that P equals 1/8 Q plus B, and we'll go ahead and put in the Q value here and the P value right there. So we get 250 equals 1/8 times 2000. What plus B, and that solving for B, we get 250 equals 250B plus B, and therefore B equals 0. So in fact, this here is 0, and so we get this as our equation for supply. All right, here we go. We're nearly there. Now we have to solve for our equilibrium. We now have our equations. We want to solve for equilibrium. And so we simply set this expression equal to this and solve for q. Negative 1/9 q plus 663 equals 1/8 q. Therefore, 663 is 1/8 plus 1/9 q. That means 1/8 plus 1/9 is 17/72 times q. And if I solve for q, that leaves me with, let's see, 663 times 72 divided by 17. 2808 is our q. And so that is our equilibrium quantity. And so to get our equilibrium price, we take this value, pop it in there for q, and so like that, divided by 8, and we have 351. Oops. And there you have it. That would be how we find our equilibrium for the demand and supply equations as they are written here. This was your host and professor, Dr. Rebecca Garcia, bidding you a very good night.